This is Nuance, and I'm Mike Scala, joined, as always, by Jay Carter. We'll be talking about a few topics here tonight, including the proposal for New York City to be able to lower its own speed limits without the state's approval. So stay tuned for that. I am joined by Jay Carter, also known as Timid, the hip-hop artist in the chair of BLM Tokyo. What's going on, Jay?
Oh, same old, same old. Everything is everything. Oh, just up and at 'em. It's morning over on this side of the world.
Oh, man.
Yeah. How about yourself?
I'm tired. I wish I could go back to bed, honestly. It's not morning here. It's after 7 o'clock p.m. Been down in Florida for a bit. We'll be here for a bit longer. I don't know if it's the Florida sun that's wearing on me or what it is, but I feel very exhausted right now. But I want to introduce, of course, our other host. We've got Sheba Abraham from the League of Women Voters. I know, Sheba, you've been working on some exciting things as well, right? What's going on with you?
Yes, I have. I've been working on a program called Read the World, a motivational reading program that will launch in Clinton Elementary School in Poughkeepsie. And we're very excited about the program, and we're looking forward to launch it. We're looking forward not only to launch it, but have our Assemblyman Jacobson involved, as well as our newly elected mayor involved in helping this program to succeed. But Mike, I'm very jealous of you. We had so much snow.
Oh,
You left and sent the snow up here.
I wasn't even aware of that. I know that it was snowing throughout the north. I saw in Massachusetts. I think they got hit pretty bad. So where you're at, you got a lot of snow?
Yes, we did.
Oh,
We got
wow.
now we're getting a lot of rain.
Okay. Well, that's exactly why I came to Florida, Sheba. So can you tell us a little bit more about this program? Is it designed to help children with their reading?
Right. Well, the program is designed to help the youth. Well, during the pandemic, we'll go back to the pandemic. The study showed, and that's nationwide, that children were 2 grades below their reading level. After the pandemic happened, they didn't excel in their reading. They still were 2 grades behind. So this program has been developed to help them get to the grade level that they should be on and make them excited about reading.
Mm.
Yes, because if you see the statistics, they went. I think they're a grade behind in math, but they went 2 grades behind. They fell 2 grades behind in reading. So, and that's on all the, from, I would say, 3rd grade and up.
Okay. And so then how is this program designed to improve those reading levels?
Well, the program is a competition.
Okay.
So, and it being a competition, it's also aligned with the requirements of the state of New York.
Mm-hmm.
So when we ask the questions will be aligned with the comprehension skills that they need to know, the language that the language, what I called in the day was language arts, which was English, how their command of English, and it's based on there's 7 principles that it's based on, that the state has, the curriculum that the state has administered to the school.
Right, right. Okay, so the students will be competing to win prizes or something like that?
Yes, they will be competing to win prizes.
Okay.
But not only that, they have to have a thorough understanding of what they're reading.
Mm-hmm.
So
Gotcha.
that's where the 7 core principles come in with the state, for how the state has
Right.
designed it. It's aligned with the state because they have to comprehend. It's literacy, like a literacy competition.
Mm-hmm.
So they have to know. Um, they have to know their reading material in depth.
Right.
We selected, one book has been selected. We didn't have time because the school year started in January. During I'm sorry, not to get all over the place, but we couldn't. We selected one book, and that was due to the fact that we didn't start in September. Had we started in September, we could have selected a series of books.
Mhm.
So
Gotcha.
we've selected one book.
Okay. So it seems like a good initiative that you're just starting up and be able to build on, hopefully be able to build on the successes of it this year going into future years, right?
Right, yes, because it is a launch. We're going to see how it's going to work in the school, and hopefully, prayerfully, it will work well, and we can have it instituted in the entire district.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, it's good.
Interesting. You mentioned something in there that they found, I guess, after the pandemic that students' reading levels had decreased.
Yes.
It's really interesting you said that because last month a report came out. There was a study that was done by an international organization, and they do this every so many years where they have this survey of these literacy levels. And Japan, the Japanese students ranked third, which is their highest level ever, and they went up like several points because in the last time they tested it was 2018, and they were 15th, and this time they came third. And so some of what's being accredited uh, for their rise is that they had the shorter school closings during the pandemic compared to other places. And a
Um,
lot of the countries that did well this time around were countries that had shorter school closings.
Hmm.
mm.
Yeah.
So
So
that's
when Sheba cites these stats, they're not nationwide stats, are they? Or are they just New York or just your district?
No, no, these are nationwide.
They are
Yes,
nationwide, but the
right, yeah,
nationwide.
because
So the US
I
maybe on the whole then went down, whereas some other states,
right,
other countries might have gone up.
right,
right.
and I thought it was just the state of New York, but I was, as a matter of fact, I was watching Hannity, and there was I think she was a mother educator, and she brought the statistics of it being the country, how the reading levels had dropped because of the
Right.
pandemic, and I was like, wow, I didn't know that um, that was the case, for the country.
Right.
I just thought it was different, like for instance, I just thought it happened in New York State, but that wasn't the case.
Right. Now those effects were actually global. A lot of countries experienced a drop with the extended school closures. Because
Mhm.
I mean, you would expect during the time if there were schools were open, they would be, actively studying and practicing those
Right,
skills. But with the school closures, that would have left a lot of that responsibility to make sure that they're doing that on the parents because the kids would have been at home.
right,
So,
Let
and
me
not only that,
ask,
we're working parents, but
I
were you
was going
going to
to
say?
ask Jay, yeah, so in Japan, you said that they went up, but that's relative to other countries, right? That's their place on the chart, right? In the world, their world standing.
right.
But do you know, or is there data available about whether Japan went up or down relative to itself, not relative to other countries?
I'm not exactly sure. I know this was talking about in this specific survey that they increased. Um, so I don't know if it's relative to itself,
Yeah.
which would be
Yeah,
an
I'm just
interesting.
wondering if it's a matter of the US and some other countries going down so much that countries like Japan are benefiting from that, but maybe that speaks more to the other countries going down than Japan going up.
Well, I can see that possibility. However, it did say that Japan went up in points. So if it was a case of other countries going down, then Japan would have had similar point level that it had before, and in other countries' points would have dropped, which would have put Japan in a higher
Right.
position. But this was
Yeah, so
points
Mhm.
actually
that's what I was
increased.
asking. So you're saying Japan, so they measured what reading comprehension levels and
Right.
found more points, meaning however they're measuring it, they're finding that the comprehension levels have gone up in Japan.
Right.
Yeah, so
Right.
that was my question. So in relation to itself, then it actually has improved.
I suppose, yeah, yeah, it would be.
Yeah.
And that was for reading. They what, reading, mathematics, and science literacy. However,
Mm,
this study wasn't it wasn't a part of this study, but their English literacy has continued to nosedive, which is their own study that they did nationally, but it wasn't a part of this.
mm,
All right, well, we'll have to keep an eye on all of that.
mhm,
Speaking of keeping an eye on things, I've been keeping an eye on the culture that I've been encountering here in the South. Now, it sounds funny saying that because we know Florida, it isn't always described as the South, even though geographically it is. I say, especially when you get to Southern Florida, maybe it's more northern in character and in culture. Maybe Northern Florida is more aligned with the South overall. With all that said, I am still noticing some differences. Last week we talked about some of the encounters that I had on my trip. Well, one thing I wanted to bring up really quickly was at the casino in Hollywood, Florida. There was an altercation, and I don't want to exaggerate.
Uh-oh.
It wasn't quite a fight, but definitely there was alcohol involved. Some people sitting at the poker table.
What did Isaac do?
No, 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 no. Isaac was not involved in this. There was a young man who was from Philadelphia, and he got into an argument with a group of young men who are from Florida. And
Mm.
I actually don't know what started the argument. It might have been a poker hand. I don't know. All of a sudden, these guys were just kind of at each other's throats. But I remember the guy from Philadelphia who was there by himself challenging them to a fight, saying, "I'm gonna knock you guys out. Let's go outside and handle this. Let's throw hands." And very calmly, the Florida guy said, "You're messing with the wrong people." And I knew exactly what that was. They weren't trying to fight. They were saying, "This is the South. We're going to shoot you." And that's a big difference between what you find, like the guy in the North, he was ready to fight. He wants to settle this by throwing hands. He's going to fight. In the South, they're like, "No, we got guns here." You know what I mean? We're not going to fight. We got a gun. And that was another example, I think, of the contrast in cultures that sometimes you'll experience between the North and the South.
Did they pull their gun or show it, or what was the resolution? What happened?
So there was a young lady who was the dealer, and I think she was maybe even more nervous in the situation than the male dealers might have been, right? Because sometimes you see these guy dealers, and they kind of have machismo mode themselves, like, "Oh, shut up!" But she was getting a little scared, like you could tell. So she called the floor over, right? The pit boss, or whoever it is, floor manager, or whatever it was, and the guy came over and she was like, "They're threatening to knock each other out," or he's saying he's gonna knock them out. And so the guy kind of gave him a very stern talking to, saying, like, "One more word out of all you and you're all leaving tonight." And then the other people at the table were like, "Hey, hey, hey, let's not break up the game here, because we were playing poker. We don't even have to leave."
Right.
So one of the Florida guys ended up saying, "I'll be the bigger." I think they said someone's gonna have to leave. I think the dealer or someone said at the table said basically that to break this up, someone's gonna have to walk away. And so one of the guys said, "I'll be the bigger man," and he left for a minute, and then he came back maybe 20 minutes later, and then they kind of bonded. It was weird. After, I guess, they had to cool off for a bit, then the guys who were fighting kind of bonded together, and they were saying, "What are you from, New York?" And he was like, "Nah, Philadelphia." And they were like, "Oh yeah, like, where you come from, you have to fight, right? Like, it's considered a thing, like you're a punk if you don't fight, right?" And he was like, "Yeah, my father would never let me step foot in the house again if I didn't stand up for myself." And
mhm.
they were kind of just like hugging each other then. They became buddies after that.
It's
Interesting.
funny, but I mean, sometimes it's if you give time for them to cool off, sometimes that can happen. You know what I
Mhm,
mean? Like the guy mentioned, like it can be an ego thing, it could be an
Mhm.
upbringing thing, it could be whatever the situation thing. Um, I remember there was a time that I was with Taz, and you've talked to Taz before. I was out here in Japan actually, and hadn't seen anything like it before. We were coming out early morning from a club and taking that first train in the morning. It's like, 5:30 in the morning. And I don't know what it was, but for some reason, either Taz and this guy, it was a Japanese guy and his girl, and then me and Taz, and I think they might have bumped into each other or something. I don't know, but whatever it was the bumping heads type of thing, and they got in each other's faces, right? And Taz is like towering over this guy. It's clearly bigger. This guy would definitely not win this matchup. And so we get on the train, I get in the middle and I'm like, okay, look, stop it, this, that. And so we're sitting on the train across from each other in the car. No one else is in the car. And the conductor had come over and like, is everything okay? And both were like, yeah, whatever. So they kept quiet. And they're just kind of glaring at each other. And Taz is like, man, this guy's crazy. What's wrong with him? He knows I'm like, yeah, and I'm like, but look, he's with his girl. He kind of has to
Right.
stand up, like otherwise he's gonna. And
Yeah.
in that moment, Taz was like, even still a little drunk, was like, yeah, you're right. And so Taz reached across the car aisle, put his hand out for a handshake, and then the guy took a moment and then reached out and they shook hands and it was done.
Mhm.
But it happens that way sometimes. So
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah. I remember while that was all happening, I think for a minute the guy from Philly even left, and someone else at the table, because everyone else at the table was pretty much from Florida. I think at that point, someone was like, "Northerners don't play. Like, you get in their face, you start something like that, it's going to be a thing. Like, it's going to be a fight. You know what I mean? Like, it ain't gonna back down." And I guess it is that tough guy attitude. But it's funny. It's a difference in that attitude because at least in this instance, the Southerners were more relaxed because I don't know if they had a gun on them, but that was kind of what they were insinuating. Like we're not going to fight you. We're just going to shoot you. Where in the North, it's like, yo, come on, let's go outside. Let's fight. Let's fight. Let's fight. They're like, we ain't fighting nobody out here,
but if they also had, it could have been other things. I mean, they had numbers on their side, it sounded like.
Right.
They could have had training,
Yeah, but no, that wasn't the vibe they were giving off. The vibe wasn't, we're going to go outside and have a karate fight. The vibe is, you're messing with Southerners, buddy. Like, you know what this means? Like think about it.
Well,
You
we're
guys
at
don't
home.
believe in guns, we do. But that was kind of what they were getting at.
But isn't Florida a right to carry state?
I believe
Open
so.
carry?
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
yeah.
And it's a
So
stand your
yeah,
ground state too.
yeah.
So
So it's an open carry state. So yeah, I would kind of I would kind of think twice about upsetting them in any way.
But I think from his perspective, it was, he's there by himself.
right.
Obviously alcohol plays a role in this, right? They were
Sure.
all kind of polluted. But yeah, he thought he had a chip on his shoulder, no pun intended, right? At the poker table.
Yeah.
But that was his thing.
Yeah.
It was this group of guys from Florida bullying him. That's how he saw it, at least, right? They were ganging up on him. So he's like, come on, let's step outside. I'll knock you all out, right? And that's kind of how it went from there. So,
but it's interesting how things can be diffused through talking, thinking about it again. I saw that happen. This is years ago on the subway, and you had this. He was a World War II veteran, and he had all these medals on his chest, and he was sitting there, not on his jacket. All his medals on his jacket. And he was sitting there, and these group of young children, young youth came up like, oh, this man is an open target. We're going to get him. We're going to do this, that, and the other. So they all, I think it was like 4 or 5 of the young people, they go over, calling themselves, they're going to mug this elderly gentleman. And he started talking to them and started telling them, giving them a history lesson on all the medals that he had on his jacket. And I have never seen youth turn, that like all of that was diffused by this man saying, let me teach you about what I have on my jacket instead of, want to fight and want to bug me on the train tonight. So it's interesting how things like that can happen.
That's a really good
It does
point,
happen.
though. I've seen situations be de-escalated just by the response, right? That's critical because people will come at you expecting a fight, and then it just kind of feeds itself, right? They're coming at with that energy. They're almost urging you to give that same energy back. And then it becomes like this mushroom cloud, right? And it's like, that's where they're trying to lead it. But if you don't give them that back and you come at them almost in a way that's surprising, like you said, he starts talking about his medals or whatever, but you do something else. It defuses the situation. It takes it to a different place that was unexpected. And then it's almost like you're tricking them out of the fight in a way. It's like it's a weird effect that happens, right? Like they don't know what hit them, and then it just
Right.
doesn't go there, right?
Yeah, it's possible. I mean, it's possible. I mean, it can happen, you know, not even just in fights, but even in discussions, arguments type of thing. People people will often respond or will come at people in a way that they're expecting, in a way to defend against how they're expecting your response to be.
Right, right.
And so
I don't know, Jay,
sometimes,
if you were there back in 2012 when we were first beginning to campaign. This
mm,
was in Rockaway. We were doing an event. You might have been there. I know Paul was there. It was in Rockaway. And it was a meet and greet at the diner. It was called the
mm,
Restaurant in Rockaway, right? Someone came very combative in his approach. And he was trying to school me on people that he said were presidents prior to George Washington. Have you heard this? There are people who go out, and it isn't entirely based in fiction. I mean, because there
right,
were presidents of the Congress and things like that. They weren't recognized as U.S. presidents the way we think of them today, but they
right,
will say that, right? They'll say that the school books are all lying to you. They were presidents prior to George Washington. There were black presidents and all that kind of stuff. So he's one of these guys, and he was coming at me so aggressively, expecting me to fight with him, argue with him, get in his face, like, you're wrong. Let me tell you why you're wrong, you know.
right.
But I was just polite, and I said, "Oh, this is very interesting." I said, "You know, thank you for sharing your beliefs with me and your information that you have here. This is all very fascinating." And just because of my demeanor and the fact that I wasn't giving him an argument back, his whole style changed, right? And you could see it kind of like melt from his face. Like he was coming at, like he was like, you know, like that, and then it just became very almost surprised first, initially surprised at my reaction, and then very friendly. It was like a complete 180 from how he was, just based on the fact that I didn't engage with the aggression, right? I was like, oh, well, thanks for that information, you know?
Right. Yeah, I don't think I was there. I think that was the day, the time we had the couple of events scheduled, and I was at the Valley Stream event, and you went to the Rockaway one.
Okay.
Yeah, but I remember you telling me about that. And yeah, it's sometimes it can happen. I mean, it doesn't happen all the time. That person could be dead set on having some sort of altercation, right? Dead set on being as aggressive as possible, and nothing will change their mind. But you know, there are times where you can de-escalate in the way that you respond.
Right, right. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the takeaway. That's really the key, you know? It's not even about what you say all the time as much as how you say it and what your attitude is, right? The energy that you give back. If they're coming at you with hostility, I think it often can be diffused by returning it with more peaceful, more calm energy, right?
Right. And it's not easy to do that, because it's
Not
easy to get
always.
caught up in
Yeah.
that energy, because
Yeah.
if they're coming at you aggressively, you're going to be put in a defensive type of position where you feel like you have to defend or fight back. And so it can be difficult to go against that urge and to respond in that kind of calm, peaceful, de-escalative type of manner.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So, one thing that I think makes it difficult for some to respond in a calm manner is the lowering of the speed limits in New York, because
Mm,
it's hearing this refrain that there's a war on drivers, right? They're trying to frustrate drivers out of their vehicles. Vision Zero, of course, is very controversial in New York City. And on the one hand, I think people pretty much agree that it's important to reduce vehicular deaths, right? And we don't want people speeding at dangerous levels. But on the other hand, there are many who talk about this notion that it's becoming prohibitively difficult to drive. And it really isn't a conspiracy theory to say that there are many people who have that as their agenda, right? Of course, there are these other worthwhile goals, such as reducing fatalities, but it often seems like people hide behind those more noble goals because they really have I don't know if sinister is the right word, but the underlying agenda of getting people out of their cars by any means necessary, right? So we've talked about that larger battle here before, but here is the latest iteration of this coming out of the proposed state budget. The governor of New York is proposing to allow the city of New York to reduce its own speed limits without asking the state for approval. Currently, the state does have to sign off on any such reductions, but the governor is saying, listen, it's New York City. You guys should be able to do what you wish within your own city limits without having to come to us every time. So I wanted to put this out to get people's thoughts and opinions on this, because I think it could be seen both ways.
So the governor is proposing to allow New York City to set their own speed limits.
Correct.
When normally you said the state is the one that makes this determination, but isn't the governor a representative of the state?
State, yeah. The governor wants to make it so that New York City no longer needs the state's approval.
Okay.
They're saying, you guys deal with it yourself. Like, we don't want to get involved in this.
But why would she not want to get involved with something like that?
Because she's saying it's a local matter.
It's a local.
Yeah, and these things get very complicated. You know, normally state law trumps city law, and normally the cities can pass whatever laws they want to that affect what goes on within the city itself. But it gets much more complicated than that, right? Like, those are the basic principles at, you know, in their most basic form. But then you always have these conflict of law and then home rule provisions, they call them, where, you know, if the state wants to pass a law that affects the city has to sign off on it, but certain things the city wants to do, the state has to sign off on it. And it just gets very, very messy and, you know, kind of obscure. So this is one of those areas where the state has to sign off on it. So the city would be, you know, if the city wants to lower a speed limit, the city would pass that, but they couldn't do it unilaterally currently without the state approving it, right? So the state is saying, listen, if you guys do that, you make that determination for yourselves, we shouldn't have to sign off on it.
Well, why was that brought before the governor? Was there an issue with speed limits in the city? Or
no, that's just how it is. The governor is just trying to undo that framework that's been existing. That's not new.
Right. But is the speed limit working in New York City? Because I know it went down from 30 to 25.
Yeah.
So
it depends on who
they want to
ask,
bring
right?
it back? Do they want to go from 25 to 30 again?
They want to go from 25 to 20.
Wow.
Okay. So
And what areas?
yeah, that's very slow.
In all of New York City.
Everywhere?
Well, that would be the default speed limit, unless there was a posted sign saying you can go more than that, which is kind of rare.
But that's within the city. What about the FDR and the West Side Highway? What about what would be the?
Oh, no, but they would have their own speed limits, right? So that would be the speed limit, unless there was something saying you can go more than that.
Right.
They're saying this is what it is for our road.
So let me ask you.
But most roads don't have that, right? Like most residential areas you go through, they don't have a posted speed limit. So there's just a default. If there is no zone allowing it to be more, it defaults to that number.
Right.
Okay. All right. I understand that.
So let me ask you this. Is this proposal just for New York City, or is that for all cities in the state?
I believe it's just for New York City.
Interesting.
I could be wrong on that, but the article that I'm reading here poses it as New York City. And normally the way that they would do this, if they were going to pass a law that affected New York City, the way that they normally do it in the state is to say that this law applies to all cities in the state that have 1 million or more residents. New York City is the only city in the state with 1 million or more residents. And so that's how they do it.
Gotcha.
So is that to discourage driving? Will that discourage people, you know?
I can tell you this, there are many people who advocate for changes like this, whose stated goal is to reduce driving. Absolutely true. I can't say it's everyone. And of course, like we said, there are legitimate concerns about speeding and about fatalities, right? Hit people with a car and killing them. Although when they passed Vision Zero, the whole initiative for Vision Zero was there was a major difference between 30 and 25. They were saying if you hit someone going 30 miles an hour, they're much more likely to die than if you hit them at 25. And at the time, they were saying we did studies on this, and we found that this seems to be kind of like the magic number, right? Like if you make it 25, they're much more likely to survive. If you make it 30, they're much more likely to die. And so this should be the spot. But now we're not too many years removed from that, you know, under 10 years really, and they're saying 20. So you can see where this is going. I'm sure it wouldn't stop at 20, right? I'm sure 15 would be next. Basically, they're going to say people are going to have to walk or ride a bike everywhere soon, I think.
Mm-hmm. That's
Yeah,
interesting.
20 is pretty slow there. I mean,
Yeah.
you're, you know, are we doing, are you getting closer to horse and buggy territory?
Yeah, yeah.
Sounds like it.
So part of this might be so that the governor could take some of the political pressure off of herself, right? Because now she has to own it. The state has to own it if they're approving these speed limits, which may be unpopular for voters in other parts of the state, let's say, right? Like, oh, look what they keep doing in New York City. They're trying to make it so difficult on people like us who drive cars. You know, I don't know. It could be a thing where she just wants to wash her hands of it and say, look, you guys deal with them. As you guys want to keep lowering speed, leave us out of this. You know,
Right.
for most of the state, what you guys are doing doesn't even make sense. We didn't want to be involved in this argument anymore.
But do you think that would cause traffic congestion to elevate or become, because I can't imagine 20 miles. I couldn't imagine. And then when you have all these trucks that come into the city, they have to do that speed limit, 20 miles, correct?
Unless otherwise posted.
Right.
That's the thing. It's not like that it's reducing every speed limit to 20. That's the default, so that if there's nothing posted, then your default is that, okay, we should be at 20. So it doesn't necessarily mean that the rest of the roads are going to be going 20 miles an hour. They could be at their regular rate. It's just the regular.
How many signs do you see? I'm sorry, what did you say, Mike?
No, most of the roads are not a higher rate. Like, those are pretty rare, right? Most of them are at the speed limit. In 2014, I was just gonna, this is from the article here. This is from Streets Blog, actually. In 2014, the state legislators gave the city permission to lower the base speed limit from 30 to 25 and 20 in school zones. And according to city data, that resulted in a 36% decline in pedestrian fatalities.
So they have an argument for, they have data backing up their reasoning.
They do it, but again, though, is 25 that magic number? I mean, at a certain point, if you were to lower it from 3 to 2, is that going to make, you know what I mean? Like, at a certain point, the more you lower it, are you reducing more fatalities, or, you know, are you just creating more traffic? Is there, because they were saying that was the number back then. I'm calling them out on that. They were saying that 25 miles an hour was the magic number, and now they want it to be 20.
I mean, if you reduce it to 5, then the fatalities is going to go down as well, because I mean, when you go down to 0, there's going to be no fatalities. I mean,
if no one drives anymore, then you'll have
there has to be there needs to be something that kind of I don't want to say verify, but proves that data that's the point, and it's not just because
also, I think there are diminishing returns there, right? I don't think this is going to be a linear path. Like, if you keep lowering the speed limit by a certain amount, your fatalities are going to keep dropping by that amount. I think you're going to get a drop off of the reduction in fatalities. You're going to be making things slower for everyone. And, you know, this to me reeks of privilege. If you're from an area where it's easy to get around, let's say you're from a part of the city that has great mass transit options, or you can get to work and school and everywhere very quickly, you know, then you kind of are privileged enough to say, yeah, let's keep lowering the speed limit. Let's slow everything down, guys. What's the rush? Slow down. But, you know, if you're in a part of the city or live anywhere where transportation is inadequate or it takes you a long time, the commutes are long, right? Like we see in South Queens and the Rockaways. Well, you're making it harder on people because they already spend too much time commuting. And now you're just increasing their commute times. And we're not seeing enough of that. I think because there's not enough of a focus on these communities, right? The people who are talking about this maybe have a more Manhattan-centric approach, or they're from more, affluent areas or different areas that don't have these same struggles, right? We're not focusing enough on the importance of reducing people's commutes. That's an issue, right? I don't see that mentioned here. Like if I Google, let's say I'm in this article. Okay, I just did a control F in this article, commute, and it did not pop up. 0 hits, right? So travel.
Oh, you are banging away at that keyboard.
Yeah, I'm trying to find discussion here about what it will do to people's commutes, and I'm not seeing that. I'm seeing the discussion.
Well, that's kind of one of your pet projects, right? So I mean, if you take that same argument and go to someone who's coming from the point of view of we're trying to save lives, then your commute argument doesn't really hold up as strongly. You're talking about reducing someone's time going to work. I'm talking about someone not getting killed by hitting a car. We're not talking about the same thing. I don't think it's a
Don't you have to though?
valid criticism.
Don't you have to include that in there? Like when we talk about the Queens Link, we're talking about all of these factors. We're talking about getting cars off the roads ourselves, which will reduce fatalities. We're reducing emissions, right? Good for the environment, all of these things. They're not. They're only focusing on that one aspect. They're not talking about the negative consequences of it. They're not talking about what it will do to people's commutes. I think that's fundamental here. The speed limit is about how fast you can drive. How fast can you get to where you're going, right?
Yeah, but if your argument is that we're doing this to reduce fatalities, then commutes is not going to be up there in the points that are considered. It's going to be more about lives lost than how someone gets to work or how long it takes them to get to work.
Should it not be considered if you're arguing this in good faith, right? Otherwise, like we said, your argument should be 0 miles an hour. No one should drive, which, spoiler alert, I think is actually what a lot of them want.
I don't think it gets to that point, but I can see people, especially if they are Manhattanites, coming from that sort of point of view, right? Because they're going to be thinking from their worldview of, oh, these people driving down the road is messing up with me when I want to cross the street, or whatever it is, because that's their whole worldview is Manhattan and walking Manhattan or train Manhattan, and not,
Listen, I don't want to pick on the person who wrote this particular article, but if you scroll down to the bottom of the article, you see her name and her picture, and she is wearing a bike helmet in the picture.
And so, what is that supposed to mean?
She has her agenda.
Yes,
bike helmet.
And you see this in the city a lot. Again, I don't want to pick on people, but you do see this. I just want to keep it real and talk about what you're seeing right now. You're seeing this struggle between people who do drive and people who don't drive. And a lot of the people who don't drive want to get all of the cars off the road. You know what I mean? And that's just not tenable for many, especially from these other neighborhoods that we talked about. The public transit system isn't that good. And you're not gonna be able to bike from Rockaway to Manhattan every day, especially if you're not as fit, or you're older, you have health issues. It's not a realistic solution to demand everyone to do. So
even if you are fit, and you don't want to bike that far every day,
especially
not in the winter.
Right, and there are people who will do such a thing, but it's not
It's
not something to say that's what everyone has to do, right? That's not realistic. So I think it's something that we need to be very mindful of, and I don't want to be an alarmist. I don't want to be feeding into this battle and making it more sensational than it is, but it is something that I am seeing, and I think it is very real, right? And in my experience working in government in the Senate, I saw and I heard that sentiment echoed amongst people who were pushing these plans, right? It was Vision Zero, select bus service. These things were being pushed at the time. And they very outwardly said, this will get cars off the road. And, I'm not saying that reducing cars isn't a noble goal, but let's be honest about what we're talking about. And let's look at the big picture, right? Let's look at what we're doing to commute times. Look at any potential diminishing returns here. The answer can't be, you went down 36%. By lowering it to this, well, every time we do it, we'll go down another 36%. It seems like that might be what they're insinuating, and I don't think it's the case.
With the 0 cars off road, wouldn't that kill the congestion pricing? if they want 0 cars off the road,
Yeah, well,
because the congestion price,
that's what they want to do. They want to reduce the congestion.
so that congestion pricing, what does it do for this, MTA?
But everyone will be taking the MTA at that point.
Right.
Yeah, but then no
So
one's
the MTA
driving,
would
there's no
benefit.
extra income coming in.
There would
Yeah,
be
but
a
Everyone
lot
will
more
be
income
taking,
coming in if
so
everyone
is that
drives
the
the car.
purpose of congestion pricing, is to have everyone take the MTA? Is that their,
That's yeah, that's a big.
they would take the MTA. It wouldn't be at the toll roads, but it would be on the train. So the MTA would benefit both ways.
Yeah, no, a big part of the reason for congestion pricing is to reduce the congestion by making it difficult, right, on your wallet to drive. And so it's encouraging more people to take the trains.
Yeah.
but is that kind of unrealistic? Would you say that's,
Oh, that's some argue, yeah, that it is.
Yeah, especially
I
when you're
would
not
say
used to better public transit. That's the thing, right? I mean, and again, this is why talking about commutes makes sense, because
it does?
I think it would be approached differently if the angle was we're going to reduce the speed limit, but we're going to be giving you better mass transit options so that you don't need to drive and so that you can still get to where you're going in a reasonable amount of time. But to reduce the speed limit to 1 mile an hour but still not give you a train, that doesn't do anything for you.
It doesn't. And some of those places, and to your point, Mike, you can hit a certain go as far as you can on the last stop on the Q train, or the trains like F train that goes to Queens. Now, what do you do from there? With the commute. So, because you have to get off, you have to take a bus, or you have to take a taxi, right?
I suppose.
So how does that all fit into, how does that help the consumer?
Well, I think if we're looking at it from the different arguments, and I haven't gone that deep in this article, but if they're looking at it from the point of view of saving lives, I don't think the consumers' interests are something that ranks when you're talking about life or death.
Yeah, they're looking at saving the lives of people who don't drive primarily. And again, it's one of those,
So that's why
it's an us versus them type battle that we're seeing being waged here, where honestly the mentality, and I've heard this, F drivers, right? They don't look at them as people who should be getting any type of rights or support. I
right.
even saw I think it was on Reddit, on one of the New York City community subreddits, someone was saying that one of the plans that they're doing in one of these Queens neighborhoods, I think it had to do with open streets, but they were saying that it would negatively affect car owners, right? Because it was making it so that you couldn't drive on some of these roads anymore. And someone responded sarcastically, "Oh no, who will think of the car owners?" And that's kind of where we are, right? The people who are pushing for some of these things look at people who own cars as already too wealthy, privileged, affluent, fought for, represented, all these different things. And they're trying to, I think from their point of view, they're trying to level the playing field by creating more of a burden on them, because they see it as giving a leg up to people who, in their view, have been held back, which are the non-car owners, right? The people who ride their bicycles or take the subways or walk or skateboard or
right. Yeah, because that's why she wore the helmet at the end of the article. So it speaks volumes.
To be fair, this was the picture that they used, I think, on all of her articles. It's just a picture of her. It's not like she wore it at the end of this article in particular. But yeah,
but it does send a message. Now you have to admit it's sending a message.
Yeah.
Let's just say though, it is a strange headshot for your journalist profile.
Yeah, but to be fair, this is Streets blog, and so this is what they're all about. This is what their blog is about.
Yeah. So
yeah, it's look, I think we need to recognize the fact that we are not a monolith, and there are people in all different types of situations. Not everyone who drives a car is some evil wealth hoarder or something like that. In certain neighborhoods, it's really your only reasonable option. And I think we have to be mindful of everyone who's on the road. Yeah, in New York City, we do have a lot of public transit, and that's great. We also have areas where the public transit is terrible and needs to be improved, and people do
Right.
rely on cars. We have areas that are more urban in character in terms of the public transit system or even the walkability, and then you have more suburban areas that are more spread out, and all these things, less, fewer bus stops, fewer subways. So all these things have to be taken into account, and we really shouldn't have this us versus them mentality. It should be a collaborative mentality, not an adversarial one. But we are seeing, I point out because we are seeing it time and time again. It's the attitude of, people in cars should be punished into oblivion, and I think that's the wrong approach.
Well, I think, and we've talked about this before, and I actually just was speaking with my cousin about this. Atlanta has the same problem where um, the the metro system is mainly designed for either the center of town or to get to the center of town and neglects whatever is around there. Whereas you look at a system like Tokyo, for example, there is the above ground and the subway trains, and all of it is interconnected between all the different places. You don't have to go, if you're on one end, you don't have to go all the way into town to come all the way back out if you go into another part of the city where there are some connection trains, and there's a lot of them in this big network. If New York had these types of systems, then it'd be more accessible to go to different areas. And then we've talked about it before, like getting from parts of Brooklyn to parts of Queens, you might have to do a roundabout type of transit to do that instead of something that goes across boroughs.
Going from Queens to Manhattan, sometimes you got to go through Brooklyn.
Right. And so expanding it in that way would have the effect that everyone seems to want, is reduce traffic and even increase reduced commute times at the same time. So
in 2013, a 12-year-old named Sammy Cohen Eckstein was killed by a driver steps from his home, I believe. And so they're nicknaming this Sammy's Law, a measure to allow New York City to lower its speed limits. I suppose it would be a way to avoid pushback from upstate lawmakers or lawmakers from elsewhere in the state, who think that would be somehow bad for them to allow it. I mean, it's kind of a funny situation where you would have legislators from elsewhere in the state, from outside New York City, telling New York City, we're not going to allow you to lower your speed limits. But, this point is often made, I think we have to acknowledge it, that the speed limits in New York City and what happens within New York City doesn't only affect people who live in New York City, right? People who work, for example, people live in Long Island or outside Westchester, other counties. They come and they work in New York, or they go see shows, or they fly in. New York City is still the biggest economic engine and the center of our whole state, right? So even whether you live there or not, no pun intended, it's the driving force. And so you do see pushback, right? If the city wants to lower its speed limit, for example, it is certainly foreseeable that maybe a state senator from Long Island will say, no, when we drive into New York, we want to be able to get home and see our wives and not be driving at 20 miles an hour, right? And so this would take it out of the purview of others, right, who are outside New York, and keep it exclusively within the jurisdiction of the city and local lawmakers, the city council, and mayor, et cetera. And so that's really what we want to know. I guess that's really the crux of it. Should New York City get to determine its own fate when it comes to this, and perhaps even other issues, or should it continue to need the state's approval when it makes these kinds of changes?
And what another thing that might be interesting to note is this reduction to 20 miles per hour as the base. Has it happened in other cities of comparable size, or other populations of comparable size? And what's been the effect there? Has it worked there? Has it not worked? Has it created more issues or solved issues? Like, that type of thing might be interesting to know as well.
Yeah, I was just looking. I mean, it's hard because there really are no cities of comparable sizes in the US, right?
I mean, LA would be probably LA, Atlanta. You could look at things now, population size, spread wise, probably not. But as far as metropolitan type, you got, the places, Dallas, DC, Chicago, places like that. I would
It's
imagine.
funny because I just did a quick Google on what is the speed limit in Los Angeles, and everything that comes up says 65 miles an hour. But they're talking about the highways, right? Because it's a different, again, it's a different culture, right? Because in LA, car culture, driving culture is very much the thing. So they're talking about trying to get down a highway, whereas in New York, it's in the city at least, it's really more side streets.
Right. And I think there's even less, there's probably even less mass transit options in LA than in New York.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Okay, here, so now we're diving further into this. I don't know if this is local. It looks like a California site. It says the speed limit is 25 miles an hour unless otherwise posted.
So yeah, I wonder if there's other places where it is 20 and what, you know, what the effect had on that. But you know, I guess we'll have to see how that works out.
Yeah. And so let's put that to the people as our poll question. The poll question of the week is, do you believe that New York City should continue to have to get the state's approval to lower its speed limits within the city?
All right. See what people have to say about that.
Thoughts on that? Sheba, do you think the state should still intervene, or should it be exclusively up to the city?
I think they should leave it up to the city.
Okay.
I think that's something that should be left up. Yeah.
It's funny because I think if you ask most people, they would assume that cities set their own speed limits themselves. Because when you go, I mean, if anyone has taken road trips and traveled, you go from city to city,
Uh-huh.
speed limits
Mhm.
do change, and you would just assume that it's the city setting those speed limits instead of
Yeah.
the state.
All right.
So,
Yeah,
Yeah,
because
it's
I know
one of
here, yeah.
those very tricky areas, especially when it comes to New York City, right? Because New York City is so central to the whole economy and the whole well-being of the whole state. And so they're so intrinsically tied. A lot of what happens in the city has to be approved by the state. I mean, you even look at something that's controversial, it comes up every so often, mayoral control of the schools, right? The
Mhm.
state has to give the mayor of New York City control of the school and has the ability to take it back, right? And say, we're going to control the schools. And so you would think, well, these are our schools. How could the state be coming in and having to give its approval over this? But,
right.
it is what you see. And I remember myself, when I would write legislation at the state level, there would always be this question. And sometimes we'd have to consult with other attorneys in Albany. And sometimes we would get conflicting results, by the way. You would get different interpretations of this, different answers as to whether you would need a home rule memo, whether the state could take action on this unilaterally, or if the city would have to approve it themselves, or potentially vice versa, right? If the city was doing something, would the state have to approve it or not? And it's
Right.
not always that cut and dry, right? It isn't
Right.
always one answer. You have to look at the state constitution, city charter, and the interconnectivity and the different laws and the precedent, and it's a mess. It really is a mess.
Right.
Sometimes you might have what you think is an answer, hypothesis, and it might be the wrong answer. Maybe a court looks at that and overturns it. And so it's you just do the best you can with this. But oftentimes that's what ends up happening. If it's affecting the affairs of one, sometimes you need their permission to do something.
Does Domino's still have their 30 minutes or less guarantee? Because
That-
if this
It might be
if the
harder
speed
to,
limit goes down to 20,
It's
it
gonna
might be
kill them,
kind of
right?
difficult.
except in most parts of the city that they might be taking the bus or the subway or a bicycle.
Uh-huh.
Have you ever gotten that, Jay, where you're at or anywhere? If you ever gotten something on Uber Eats, you'll get a message, such and such is on a bicycle. And then you think, oh man, I hope my food isn't cold by the time it gets here.
Bicycle, yeah, yeah. Never like a subway or a train or something, but bicycle, yeah. Like when I was living in Hiroshima,
Mhm.
um the guy there or some of the delivery people there would take bicycles for deliveries.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I
So
mean, think about it. I guess,
yeah, bicycle delivery is common, especially in New York. I mean, the most famous image of bicycle delivery people is New York City.
Right.
right.
I was
I've
gonna
seen
say,
it in Rockaway. We have, ordering Uber Eats from Rockaway, which, as
Right.
we discussed, isolated, right? It could be far from other things. You order something and you get a message, they're on a bicycle and they'll be there in like 50 minutes. You're thinking, man, like the food definitely gonna be cold by the time it gets here.
Right. Well, I mean, hopefully they've got one of those thermo packs that keeps your stuff warm, you know.
Yeah.
Well,
So
What about
you know,
other parts of the city where people don't really drive?
but think about not even just bicycle though. Like
Yeah.
people do deliver on like scooters, which would be
Right.
pretty
Right.
similar. I mean, time would be a little bit faster, but it's still similar as far as taking it outside.
Yeah. Yeah.
well, I'm
So,
glad I don't have to worry about that because where I am, if you don't have a car, you're pretty much stuck.
It's
you know, they
like
could
that
take a bike to
in
you.
most
You
of the
need a
US,
car.
right? And that's pretty much I think that's the norm throughout the US.
Yeah.
New York is really a bit of an anomaly when it comes to
New
that. And
York
you can
City,
see
New
why,
York City.
because of how the city, because of how it's situated. But it's funny because people will act like that's the norm everywhere. I mean, travel a little bit outside, like Sheba said, travel even in New York State outside the city and see, yeah, people have to rely on cars because things are more spread out and it takes further. You're
Mhm.
not gonna be able to bike everywhere or anywhere really.
Uh-uh.
So that, it's something to think about because you do
Yeah.
see, these, and they usually originate from cities like New York and Los Angeles, a vision for a car-free future and things like that. All right, but how's that going to work in the middle of Wisconsin or something?
Right, right. Yeah,
So,
yeah. So, we'll see what the poll results are. We had a few comments in the chat here. One, I don't drive, but I don't mind cars on the road. Less cars would definitely be better, especially for the environment, but no cars on the road wouldn't work. So,
pretty soon we're just going to have Amazon Prime trucks and Ubers on the road.
Uh-huh.
well, Amazon has been testing their delivery by drone. So there wouldn't even be anything on the road. It'd just be a drone flying into your delivery and dropping it off on your porch.
Open your window.
Yeah, they've been
By the
testing it
way,
in a few cities.
I wanted to mention this. I forgot to mention this last week. It seems I have something like a self-driving car, and I didn't know it because I put the cruise control on for the first time coming to Florida. And the first thing I noticed was I set it to a certain amount and it wasn't maintaining that speed, but then it would go up on its own and then it would go back down on its own. What it was doing is it was maintaining a safe speed behind the car in front of me, right?
Right.
Only with the cruise control, it could be a bit of a hassle if you have a little bit of traffic or someone breaks and you got to slam on your brake or someone's slowing down. You got to slow down. You got to turn the cruise control off, then put it back on. With this, it was able to maintain a safe speed. It went to that maximum speed. Whatever I set was the maximum it would go to, but then it would slow down automatically. But then I was thinking, if it could do that, I wonder if it could steer itself also. And so I did, when it was safe to do so, kind of take my hands off the steering wheel for a second. And yeah, it did actually steer to keep me in the lane. And I'm thinking, oh, wow, this car is driving itself right now completely. It did, though, come up with a message after a few seconds saying, put your hands back on the steering. So I guess they didn't want you to rely on that, but it actually will guide itself.
Yeah, the one you're talking about would be adaptive cruise control, where it matches based on the speed of the car in front.
I think they
Um,
called it, like radar enhanced or something like that.
right. And that probably enough to keep you in the lane as far as steering, but probably not
Uh-huh.
to go around curves and
Right.
stop and
I'm
all
not going to
that.
program it
Uh-huh.
on my GPS and have it just make all the turns for me.
Right, right. Speaking of that, the cars that are most famous for having that is the Tesla models, and
Yeah.
they just had recalls in the States, 2 million cars, actually all the cars in the States, about 2 million, and because they were having troubles with the auto driving, and then same in China with the Teslas, they had to do a 1.8 million car recall. However, they call it a recall, but it's not that people have to bring in their cars or return their cars. It's just it has to have an update, which is going to be delivered wirelessly over the air like Wi-Fi. So it's not really a recall, but that's what they're calling it.
Mhm.
Mm.
So
Interesting.
Total recall.
Uh-huh.
right, partial recall. So
All right. Well, I think we're about at our time. I know we had something else we were going to mention. Do we want to save it till next week or talk about it briefly?
we could probably save it till next week.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we've got some more topics coming up next time. I know we are, if not past 100,000 views on YouTube, we gotta be very close to it now.
We are very close. We are not there yet. We are almost there.
Okay. So we'll
Yeah.
keep an eye on that. I guess we can go to the bottom line. You know, it's
Yeah.
funny. I said something earlier that I thought sounded like a bottom line.
You did. It was right in the outset almost.
Well, I was talking about, well, what was that? Maybe it was something that, not that I'm thinking of then.
Um, I think
Oh,
it was
about the
about
de-escalating situation.
de-escalating.
Yeah. No, I was thinking
Yeah.
something I just said a couple of minutes ago, really, about having a more collaborative relationship as opposed to an adversarial one, right?
Mm,
When we're in the political space, especially, as an
Mhm.
attorney, you always hear it's an adversarial type relationship, and that's all good. Your client's interest versus theirs, and hopefully
mhm.
land at a good spot. But when it comes to matters of public policy, I don't think we should dive in with this adversarial attitude. I guess this does tie back to what we talked about at the poker table, right? And
Mhm.
de-escalate situations. I don't think that hostility is what we should lead with, because it does foster this us versus them type environment, which comes with pushback. So even if there's common ground to be found, and we talk about this a lot on here, how no matter where you fall, you can find a lot of common ground really amongst a lot of different types of people. Well, when you are approaching the conversation as an us versus them type scenario, as an adversarial one, then even if there would be common ground to be found, the person that you're engaging with, is going to resist that because of the fact that you're approaching them with that hostile energy. And if the attitude is, for example, screw all the drivers, well, the drivers are not going to want to work with you on your initiative now, because you've made it a battle, and vice versa, right? It goes both ways. So
Mhm.
maybe we should be moving away from this hostile political climate to the extent possible. I know it's so difficult the way things are now, so polarized. Everyone's, we understand that. But if we may be more mindful of that, right? Even when it comes to local issues where we should be able to find common ground, if we just are mindful enough to approach them as, let's all work together. And that's why I said earlier again about, why aren't you putting the commutes in there? Because you want to be able to touch everyone's interest, signal to them that you understand what's important to them. Where is this going to hit them? What is their priority in this? And then you can have a more nuanced and comprehensive discussion about solutions, that aren't only it's me versus you, and I'm going to fight for everything for me, and you're going to fight for everything for you, and we're not going to agree on anything and probably get nowhere except a fight, right? So that's my bottom line.
Sounds good. Sounds
Yep.
good.
Sounds
For
great.
those who want more bottom lines and more topics, they can visit us on YouTube at Nuance Show, as well as Instagram, and apparently engage on Reddit as well. Same Nuance Show, right?
Yeah.
Also podcasts available, Spotify, Apple Music, anywhere you can get your podcast and have it sent directly to your device, whichever that may be, phone, tablet, computer, desktop, whatever you got. All
Yeah.
right. Sounds good.
Sounds good to me. Thank you all
Yep.
for tuning in. Thank you, Jay. Thank you, Sheba. As always, we've got work to do. We'll catch you next time.